Okay, so we are moving towards the last part of this chapter, that is the purification of organic compounds, the qualitative analysis as well as quantitative analysis. Okay, so first part of that is the purification of organic compounds. So how we can purify organic compounds, that's what we are going to discuss here. So there are many techniques are there which is used for purification. So first one is called sublimation. Okay, next one we need to learn is called crystallization. Then we have distillation, but this distillation can also be further classified into different categories. Okay, we will see all these in detail. Next we need to learn about differential extraction, that is another important technique. And last comes the chromatography. The chromatography is also further divided into different categories. Okay, so let's go to the first technique, that is sublimation. So what is basically sublimation? From the term itself we could understand here, we can say solid organic substances are okay. If you say that is a sublimable compound, we can say it can be directly converted to vapor state without passing through the liquid state. Okay, this purification technique we call it as sublimation. So what we need to do here, suppose you have a mixture of organic compound, think like you have a mixture of organic compound. Okay, it has two compounds, let's say organic compound 1 and you have another organic compound 2. We can say one among these organic compound 1 and 2, this for example here, assume like this is sublimable. Okay, then I can say the next one is not sublimable. In that case I can separate these mixtures based using the concept of sublimation, because on heating the first organic compound directly gets converted to the vapor state and only the organic compound 2 remains, because this is non-sublimable. This is non-sublimable. Okay, so based on sublimation, we can separate it. So this is used to separate sublimable compounds from non-sublimable compounds. Examples for sublimable compounds are, I can say ammonium chloride. I have listed down ammonium chloride. Okay. Then what are the other compounds? I can say iodine is there. Okay. Then you have camphor is there. Okay. Camphor. Then anthracene, naphthalene. All these are sublimable compounds. Clear? This can be separated from non-sublimable compounds. Now next comes the technique that is called crystallization. Okay, crystallization. So this is also used for the purification of solid organic compounds. Now here the technique is totally different. Here it is based on the concept that this particular compound have difference in solubilities. Okay, it is based on the difference in the solubilities of the compound. Okay, and the impurities in a suitable solvent. So I can say if I have a solvent is out there. Okay, this is my solvent that is taken in a beaker. Okay, let's assume. Okay, in a beaker I have taken it out. Now let's say here you have solvent is there. Now I can say if you want to separate a mixture, okay, you have a mixture is given here. Okay, this is a mixture that is made up of two organic compound OC1. Okay, organic compound 1 and organic compound 2, OC2. Now I can say here the organic compound 1 has a solubility that might be very much high in this solvent, and organic compound 2 will have a different solubility than the organic compound 1. So that's why I can say here the impure compound is dissolved in a solvent in which it is sparingly soluble at room temperature but appreciably soluble at a higher temperature. Okay, so what will happen on cooling the solution, the pure compound crystallizes out and is removed by filtration. Okay, if the compound is highly soluble in one solvent and very little soluble in another solvent, crystallization technique can be satisfactorily carried out in a mixture of these solvents. So let me explain that technique one more time. Very simple. You have OC1 and OC2. Let's say in this mixture, this is what I need it. Okay, needed compound is this one. So whatever needed, that we say it is as the pure one. So other one, whatever that is not needed, that is considered as impurity. Okay. Now if I am going to mix this compound in a solvent, I can say organic compound 1 will dissolve. Okay, and organic compound 2 will dissolve in a different extent, to a different extent. Now on cooling, what will happen here is the one which is less soluble, for example let's say organic compound 2 is less soluble, that will get recrystallizes. That means it will form, it will get converted back to solid form and it can be easily removed. Okay, so that is a simple technique. So the concept here is the difference in solubility of the mixture in a particular solvent. Now the example I can say a pure sample of alum or copper sulfate, an impure sample of alum or copper sulfate can be separated out. Okay. Also it is used to obtain pure salt from seawater. In seawater we know salt is there. To obtain salt from the seawater we use this technique. Okay. So I hope crystallization technique is also clear for you. Now we'll go to the next technique, that is distillation. Okay. Okay, the next technique we are going to learn here is called distillation. It's a very important technique since there are different methods of distillation is there. Okay, so the basic concept here is this method is used to separate volatile liquids from non-volatile impurities. So that means if you one of the liquids is volatile and impurity is non-volatile. Okay, the other point is the liquid having sufficient difference in their boiling point can be separated by distillation. Okay, so we will see why it is like that. We will see the different types of distillation first. We have simple distillation, we have fractional distillation, we have steam distillation, and finally we have distillation under reduced pressure. Now what is basically simple distillation? You can see here the setup of simple distillation. Okay, so you have a heating funnel is there that is heating the liquid that is present in the flask. Correct? You could see it. Correct? Okay. Now this will heat this round bottom flask that has the organic mixture that is present. Okay. Now what will happen? We know that if it is a mixture of liquid, we know it's a mixture of organic compounds. So in that there can be two possibilities. The mixture can be one of the organic compound in that mixture can be volatile. Okay, and other is non-volatile. Then what will happen when heat comes up? This volatile liquid will get into vapor state and it will go through here. Correct? It will come through here. Okay, then thermometer will measure the amount of heat that is present here. Now it will go through this condenser. Correct? When it passes through the condenser, what is happening here? Water inlet is there. So this water inlet will cool this system and it will condense back to normal form, and it is getting stored in this funnel. So you are separating this organic compound 1 from organic compound 2, which is non-volatile. This is one way you can apply this technique. The other technique is you are taking a mixture. Okay, you are taking a mixture. In that, one of the organic compound 1 has a higher boiling point. Let's say, for example, 300 degrees Celsius. And let's say organic compound 2 has some 100 degrees Celsius. If this is the difference in temperature, we know that when temperature increases and it becomes around 100 degree, then what will happen? Organic compound 2 only organic compound 2 only vaporizes and it will go through the condenser and gets collected. So we can separate organic compound 2 from organic compound 1. So these are the two ways in which simple distillation is used. And bigger example here is chloroform. Please remember the examples: chloroform and aniline. Aniline has a boiling point of 457 Kelvin and chloroform has 334 Kelvin. There is sufficient difference in boiling point is there. So they can be separated by simple distillation. Clear? So just I am reading the points. On boiling, the vapors of what will happen? The low boiling components are formed first. Then the vapors are condensed by using a condenser and the liquid is collected in a receiver. Correct? The vapors of high boiling component, they form later. Correct? High boiling component, they will form later and this liquid can be collected separately. Because we know that from this diagram itself, first liquid will be collected here, then the heat needs to be provided again for the other liquid to get it vaporized. By that time we will keep another separating funnel and collect the other liquid. Thereby we can separate two organic compounds. This is called simple distillation. So example is what? Chloroform and aniline can be separated by what? Simple distillation. Now let's go to the next technique, that is the fractional distillation. So here we say if the difference in boiling point of the two liquids is not much. Suppose you say one component has 100 degrees Celsius as the boiling point. Okay, other one has 110 degrees Celsius. So we can say there is no sufficient difference in boiling point. Then in that case we use fractional distillation. So in fractional distillation, the setup of simple distillation remains the same, but here this point will be separated. Here we can see normal flask is being used. This is a setup of simple distillation. Now in fractional distillation we use something called fractionating column that will be used instead of that. Okay, so fractionating column can be of different types. This one is called bubble plate column and this is called simple packed column. Okay, Now here, what is the technique here is, we will pass the mixture through this fractionating column that is placed here, which can be either simple packed column or bubble plate column. Then what will happen here is, the vapors, the first formed vapors, for example at 100 degrees Celsius, we will get the first vapor. So that will pass through this column, and when 110 degree Celsius happens, the other one will start vaporizing, but it cannot get mixed up very easily because there is a lot of hindrances there, either in the form of bubble plate or in the form of glass beads. So they will move through this column very slowly, so they can be separated out. Otherwise, what will happen, if there is no hindrance, they will get mixed up in this column, and again you cannot make it separated. Okay, so that's what it is mentioned here. It is used to separate different fractions of crude oil in petroleum industry. Example is very important. We know crude oil, kerosene, different fractions you will get at different temperatures. So mainly it is used in petroleum industry to separate crude oil. Okay, so in this technique, what will happen, vapors of a liquid mixture, they are passed through the fractionating column before the condensation. Vapors of the liquid with higher boiling point, they condense before the vapors of the liquid with lower boiling point. The vapors rising up in the fractionating column becomes rich in more volatile component. Correct? So only thing is, because of this fractionating column, these are getting separated very easily. It is not getting mixed up. That is a point to be remembered. Okay. So we can say, what is the use of the fractionating column? Here the fractionating column provides many surfaces for heat exchange between the ascending vapors. We know through the fractionating column, okay, through the different fractionating column, the vapors will ascend in one direction, and there will be those vapors that has already reached here, they will start condensing through this point. So there is, what will happen, there is rising vapors have more heat. Here the vapors that is moving down, it is already cooled down, so there can be heat exchange happening between the ascending limb and the descending limb. That you need to remember. So some of the condensing liquid in the fractionating column, what it will do, it will obtain the heat from the ascending vapors and it will get re-vaporized. There can be possibility like that. Okay, so what will happen is, after a series of successive distillations, you will be the distillation flask gets enriched in high boiling component, because almost all the low boiling component will get separated in the separating funnel and it will be removed. Then the remaining thing will be the high boiling component. Correct? So each successive condensation and vaporization in the fractionating column is known by a technical term. Okay, each successive condensation as well as vaporization is, until the unit in the fractionating column is called a theoretical plate. These you should remember, because sometimes they can ask. So the concept is again simple. You have a mixture of organic liquid, they have very small difference in boiling point, so you will heat it. So first, whichever has the higher boiling point, that will get vaporizes, then the other one will get be vaporized. But here the lower boiling point one will not get mixed with the higher boiling point one, and the lower boiling point one will first vaporizes and it will go through this descending limb. So by the time this high boiling point, when vapor it comes up through it, there will be heat exchange and this will get separated. So each time of successive condensation and vaporization is known by the term theoretical plate. Clear? Now we have the next one, that is called distillation under reduced pressure. So here you can see the setup of a distillation under reduced pressure. So here you can see a manometer is being used. Okay, this is to reduce the pressure or to control the pressure through this vacuum pump. Okay, please remember, when they can give the different diagrams and ask you what is the technique being used. So whenever a manometer and vacuum pump, other things are connected here, that means it is distillation under reduced pressure. Now let's say, what is this being used for? This method is basically used to purify liquids which are having very high boiling point, and also they decompose at or below their boiling point. So please understand, if an organic compound is having very high boiling point, means you need to give a huge amount of heat to make it boil. So what we need to do, we cannot give that much amount of heat, because even the funnel will not bear that much amount of heat. So in that case, what we need to do, we need to make its boiling point little bit low. How we can make it? Because we know boiling point is the temperature at which its partial pressure, the partial pressure of the liquid becomes equal to the vapor pressure of the atmosphere. So what we will do is, we will change the pressure of this system to a lower pressure. Now we can say this liquid will boil at a pressure when that pressure becomes equal to this lower pressure. So that to attain this lower pressure or to become equal to this lower pressure, you need to give only less amount of heat. So that's why we say purify liquids which are having high boiling point and they decompose at below or their boiling points. That is the second reason we are lowering the pressure. Why? Because at the boiling point they start decomposing. If they are decomposing, what will happen? The actual nature of the compound will get changed. So what we do here, so we will make that liquid to boil at a temperature lower than their normal boiling point. How we can make a compound boil at a temperature lower than its normal boiling point? By reducing the pressure on their surface. Why? Because if you reduce the pressure on the surface, then what will happen? The liquid will always try to check if its vapor pressure is equal to the vapor pressure, the pressure above it. If that becomes equal, then we say it has reached the boiling point. So to do that, we will reduce the pressure near to its surface by making use of a manometer. Okay, the best example, also the most repeated question, glycerol, okay, and spent lye. Glycerol can be separated from spent lye in soap industry by using this technique. It's a repeated question. It is using distillation under reduced pressure. Two reasons why we are reducing the pressure. One reason is at a boiling point it will decompose, so there is no use after decomposing. And the second reason is it has a very high boiling point, so you need to give a large amount of heat. These are the two reasons why we are going for reducing the boiling point. This is done by reducing the pressure. Okay. Now the last technique we are going to explain under distillation here is steam distillation. So in the steam distillation, what we do is we use a separate funnel with water. You can see here. Okay, and this will provide the sufficient amount of steam that is required. So when we are boiling here, you can see what will happen. The water will get converted to steam and that will be entering into this particular funnel that is having the mixture. Okay, and we can say here we are going to separate organic compounds which are steam volatile. So for example, let me say I have an organic compound 1, okay, and there is another organic compound 2 is there, and if I am applying steam to this organic compound, this will get volatile. So I can say this compound is steam volatile and this is not steam volatile. So in that case, what we can say, we can separate these two by applying steam to this organic mixture, so that the first organic compound, which is steam volatile, will get vaporized and it will pass through this condenser and get separated. Okay, we can see here this technique is applied to separate substances which are steam volatile and are immiscible with water. Why we want this to be immiscible with water? Otherwise, when it gets condensed, it will get mixed with water, and again you need to separate this water and this organic compound 1. That is very difficult. So we need to ensure that that organic compound is not soluble in water. So in steam distillation, steam from a steam generator is passed through a heated flask containing the liquid to be distilled. You can see here. Correct. Now what will happen? The mixture of the steam and the volatile organic compound. Which volatile organic compound? The steam volatile organic compound. The steam volatile organic compound is condensed and collected. The compound is later separated from the water using a separating funnel, because we can easily separate it because they form separate layers. You can see here the liquid is forming a lower layer below and the water is forming a separate layer because they are immiscible in water. So using a separating funnel, we can easily separate these two. That is the reason why we choose the steam volatile organic compound should be immiscible with the water. Clear? I hope this is clear for you. Very, very important, this technique. Okay. So here we are doing some calculation also. We can say in steam distillation, the liquid boils. When it will boil, we can say when the vapor pressure due to the organic compound 1, that is P1, and due to the vapor pressure P2 becomes equal to the atmospheric pressure. We know that. Okay, if one of the substance in the mixture is water and other is a water insoluble substance, then we can say the mixture will boil close to 373 Kelvin, because water already has a boiling point of 100 degree. So the other one will already immiscible in water, so it will have a boiling point less than that. So we can say the mixture will have a boiling point near to this 373 Kelvin. So please remember here, the most common example here is aniline and water. Aniline can be separated from water using steam distillation, because aniline is steam volatile. Please remember this. Okay, so the next technique we are going to explain here is differential extraction. Okay, the next technique we are going to explain here is called differential extraction. This is a nice technique, but it's not that efficient technique, I can say. So here I will first explain the technique. Please listen to this. So here you can see here one funnel. Okay, so here you can see the solvent. There is one layer of solvent is applied here. Okay, and you can see your organic compound is mixed with the water in the lowermost layer. So you can see here your organic compound is mixed with water and it is being placed here, correct? That is forming a distinct layer with another organic solvent. Okay, so here when this technique is used, that is what first we need to learn. So I can say you have an organic compound 1. Okay, organic compound 1 that is soluble in water. Okay, so soluble in water. So what it will form, we will get a mixture that is organic compound with water. You will get a mixture like this. Okay, now you want to separate this organic compound from this water. What you need to do, you are taking another solvent. Okay, the peculiarity of this solvent is this solvent has a peculiarity like this organic compound 1 is also OC1 is also soluble. OC1 is soluble in this solvent also. Okay, now the question here is in which liquid it is more soluble. So we should choose this solvent in such a way that the organic compound 1 should be more soluble in this particular solvent rather than in water. Now you are putting this solvent layer also here, and you should also take one more important condition. The solvent and water should be immiscible. That means they should not be reacting with each other, or it should not be mixed, or what we can say, it should not solve one another. So we can say immiscible. Okay, so when you are adding the solvent layer to this particular layer, it is first forms a separate layer like this. Now what you need to do, you need to shake it. On shaking it, we know that this organic compound, which is, I will represent it with another color. For example, let me say in this organic compound is staying like this. Okay, now what this organic compound will do is it will go to this solvent because it is getting mixed up, in which it is more soluble, and you will get a new layer that is called organic solvent. We can see here organic compound 1 plus solvent. This layer is now organic compound 1 with the solvent. Now water separately forms a lower layer here. Okay, water will separately forms a lower layer which does not have any organic compound. So when you remove this funnel, first round the water completely goes out and you are getting a new mixture. Now many students will ask a doubt, sir, we want to get the organic compound separately, but initially the organic compound was soluble in water. You got an organic compound water mixture. Now you removed the water, but you are getting organic compound with the solvent mixture. So what can be done next to get the organic compound alone? So for that one, what we need to do here is we need to do a separate distillation. So on distillation, what will happen? The solvent we can choose in such a way that it has a low boiling point, so it will easily get into the vapor state and gets removed, and you can get the organic compound 1 alone. So this is the basic technique being used here. Now next we will go through the points. So we can say when an organic compound is present in an aqueous medium, it is separated by shaking it with an organic solvent in which it is more soluble than in water. The organic solvent and the water or the aqueous solution should be what? Immiscible with each other, so that they will form two distinct layers which can be separated by separating funnel. The organic solvent, what we need to do later, it can be removed by either distillation or by evaporation. Okay. So if the organic compound is less soluble in organic solvent, suppose a situation comes, this OC1 is less soluble in organic solvent, then what we need to do? We need to use a large quantity of solvent to extract a very small quantity of the compound. So this technique of continuous extraction is employed in such cases. So what we are doing here is to make profit is we will use that solvent repeatedly. After separating, after distillation, we will make use of that solvent again to separate the mixture repeatedly. This whole technique is called differential extraction. Now we will go to the new technique that is called chromatography. Okay, so next what we are going to discuss here is the technique that is called chromatography, the last technique. So we can say chromatography is a technique which can be used to separate the mixtures, okay, into their different components. It is also used to purify the compounds and also to test the purity of the compounds. Okay, three uses are there. Now, this method was initially used for the separation of colored substances or pigments that were found in the plants actually. Okay, now later it was extended for many other separation of many other organic compounds. So here, first thing you should remember here is, here the mixture of substances which is to be separated, the mixture of substances that is to be separated is applied on a stationary phase. So you will have something called a stationary phase is there. Okay, stationary phase is there. So that can be any solid substance or anything, and there is something called a mobile phase is there. So mobile phase is usually the mixture of organic compound to be separated, the mixture of OZ, organic compound, that is to be separated. Okay, that is to be separated. So that's what I told. The stationary phase can be either solid or it can be liquid, depending upon. Okay, now what will happen, this mobile phase will start moving through this, which medium, the solid phase or the stationary phase. This is my stationary phase. Now what will happen, the mobile phase, that is a mixture of substance, will pass through this one, and what will happen here is, here we know this mixture is made up of OZ1 and OZ2, let's say. So what will happen is the OZ1 will get absorbed to a higher extent initially. Now OZ2 will not get absorbed initially, but it will get absorbed late, so it will form a distinct layer below. So thereby we can separate this OZ1 and OZ2 using this stationary phase and mobile phase. This I have explained here is the first one. We will come to that. There are different types of chromatography, that's adsorption chromatography, I have explained here. Okay, so the technique I hope you understood. So a pure solvent or a mixture of solvent or a gas which is allowed to move slowly over this stationary phase, and this moving phase is called my mobile phase. Okay, so let's say the chromatography is classified into different categories. The first one is called adsorption chromatography. Please remember, it is not absorption, it is adsorption. Adsorption chromatography. Okay, the next one is called partition chromatography. So first we will try and understand in detail what is adsorption chromatography. So we can say adsorption chromatography is based on the fact that different compounds are adsorbed on an adsorbent to different degrees. For example, we will take the solid phase. This is my solid phase here. Okay, so let's assume in adsorption chromatography we are taking an adsorbent. What is an adsorbent? Which can adsorb the substance. Now what we will do, we will pass through the mixture. Okay, this is my mixture. This is made up of organic compound 1, organic compound 2, like that. So when it is passed through this adsorbent, what it will form, each organic compound will be adsorbed to a different degree. So those who are adsorbed very heavily, that will form initial band here, like this. Now let's say we have another organic compound that is adsorbed very late. That means little it is getting adsorbed. That will form a distinct layer in the ground. So this is how we will be able to separate the various compounds. So we can say commonly used adsorbents are, or the solid phase are, silica gel and alumina. Please remember this. Okay, so now what we will do, the mobile phase is allowed to move over this stationary phase. So the component of the mixture move by varying distances over the stationary phase, because the one which is readily adsorbed will get completely adsorbed initially itself, so that will move only very little. But the one which is very less adsorbed, that will move to a larger extent. You can see here at this point only it is getting completely adsorbed, so we can say that will move to a larger distance. Okay, now you can see one example here. Even this adsorption chromatography is further divided into two based on the way in which it is adsorbed. For example, one is called column chromatography. In column chromatography, we will create different columns like this, and we will pack these columns with the adsorbent, as silica gel or alumina. In 3 distinct layers, we will pack this. Now after that, what we will do, we will pass this mixture, that is the mobile phase. The mobile phase is, then we will pass through this this solid adsorbents. Then what we will do, this mobile phase means mobile, okay, it's not mobile gas actually, mobile phase. Okay, so this mobile phase will be actually a mixture of the organic compound to be separated. It is a mixture of OZ to be separated. Now what will happen, you can see here the solvent is there, the mixture of organic compounds you can see initially here, then what is happening over the time? As the time progresses, you can see this is getting separated. A is forming a layer here. You can see another layer which is made up of B and C. When again it is moving down, we can see B is forming a separate layer and C is forming another layer here. So you are able to separate A plus B plus C mixture very easily using this column chromatography technique. Clear? So I hope the technique is clear for you. So we can say the points like this. Column chromatography involves separation of a mixture over a column of adsorbent. Since we are using a column of adsorbent, we say column chromatography. So column of adsorbent, where it is packed in a glass tube. The column will be fitted with a stopcock at its lower end. So stopcock means that can control it, how much or else it will go down. Okay, the mixture adsorbed on the adsorbent is placed on the top of the adsorbent column. Okay, packed in a glass tube. An appropriate eluent, or which is a liquid or a mixture of liquids, is allowed to flow down the column slowly. So here the mobile phase is also known by the term eluent. Please remember. So eluent, we can say it is the mobile phase. Okay, that is passing through the stationary phase. Okay. So depending upon, so here what is the principal technique? The technique is the degree of adsorption. We can say the concept is the degree of adsorption, ADSORPTION, degree of adsorption of various organic compounds, of various OCs, various organic compound is different or variable. Okay. Depending upon the degree to which compounds are adsorbed, the complete separation takes place. The most readily adsorbed substance will be near the top and others come down to various distances in the column. I hope the adsorption chromatography is clear for you. In that, what I have explained is first one, the column chromatography. Next, we will try to explain the second type of adsorption chromatography, that is called TLC, or it is also called thin layer chromatography. The technique remains the same. Instead of different columns, here we have a glass jar is there. Correct? Now we will go into detail of this technique now. Okay, so next what we are going to discuss here is the second type of adsorption chromatography. The first one we have already seen, that was a column chromatography. Next what we are going to learn here is called thin layer chromatography. It is also called TLC, thin layer chromatography. So let me explain the technique first, then you can listen to the points. Now here in this thin layer chromatography, we will have a jar will be there. Okay, and there is an adsorbent, there is a glass plate will be there. You can see a glass plate at the center. Okay, and this will be coated with what? Adsorbent. Again, it is based on adsorption. So there will be adsorbent will be there, that will be coated here. Okay, so we can say it is coated with the adsorbent. Now what we will do, then in the bottom of the jar you can see a set of solvent is there. So here this solvent is also called eluent, which is the moving phase. And this glass, the adsorbent coated glass plate, adsorbent coated glass plate is the stationary phase here. Okay, the adsorbent coated glass plate is a stationary phase. Now what we will do here is the mixture that is to be separated is applied on the center of this glass plate as a dot. Okay, separate mixture. So we can say this is applied usually at around some 2 centimeters above this one, or 2 mm I think. Okay, about 2 centimeters, sorry. So this distance from the ground line, okay, it is some 2 centimeter I can say the mixture is applied. Now what will happen here is this eluent, we know it will rise up through this glass plate. Why? Because it is coated with the adsorbent. So slowly this eluent keeps moving up through this glass plate. Then what will happen is when it moves through this mixture, or this mixture, you can see what will it will do is it will take this mixture also up. Then what will happen is this mixture will get adsorbed on this glass plate to a different extent. So that first layer will be formed here, then there will be remaining mixture, again it will form here. So we can say that the mixture or the organic compound that is readily adsorbed will form a coating near to here, near to this mixture, immediately form. The other one will form, or at the top I can say the coating that is, or the layer that is formed at the top is the one which is less adsorbed in this case. But in the other one it is totally different, because the other one, the eluent in adsorption chromatography, the first one column chromatography, the eluent was moving down, but here the eluent is moving up. So here this one will be most readily absorbed and this one will be absorbed thereafter. So this is the basic technique. Okay, now you can see this is called developed chromatogram. So this is considered as the baseline, and here this mixture is applied or as the spot. Then you can say this is the initial distance, that is x is around some 2 centimeter. Now when it moves up, it will form distinct layers. Then the solvent may move completely up depending upon the adsorption. Okay, so we can say thin layer chromatography is another type of adsorption chromatography, okay, which involves the separation of substance of a mixture over a thin layer of an adsorbent coated glass plate. It will be applied as an thin layer, or it will be applied as a thin dot across an adsorbent coated glass plate. Now a thin layer of an adsorbent silica gel is spread over this glass plate of suitable size. This plate is known as thin layer chromatography plate or chroma plate. This is what I have drawn here initially. This is my chroma plate. Now the solution of the mixture to be separated is applied as a small dot or small spot about 2 centimeter on one end of the TLC plate. The glass plate is then placed in a closed jar containing the eluent. So the eluent is the solvent that is present here. Now what will happen? The eluent will move up. This is what the point you should remember. It is moving up. The components of the mixture also, what it will do, this mixture also move up along the to a different distances. So one will be forming a layer here, then another will forming a layer here, then the next compound may be forming a layer here, like this. So the blue color here formed, or the blue color that is forming near to that one. Okay, the blue color is formed very near to this one, is the one which is readily adsorbed. Okay, depending upon the degree of adsorption and separation takes place. So here the relative adsorption of each component of the mixture is expressed using a factor that is called retardation factor or RF value. So what is basically RF value of a particular compound? I can say it is equal to distance moved by the substance from the baseline. So this is my baseline, and let us assume the blue color is formed here. Then this is the distance. For example, let me say this distance is 3 centimeter. Okay, now divided by distance moved by the solvent. The solvent may be moving up to last up to the top. Maybe I can say this value is somewhere around 5 centimeter. So an RF value will be how much? RF will be 3 by 5. And please remember, always the solvent will get adsorbed to the maximum value. So always I can say this RF value will be less than 1. Okay, or equal to 1, less than or equal to 1, because there can be some organic compounds that will be adsorbed very at the top. So both will be, even the mixture as well as the solvent will be moving to the same distance. So in that case RF will be 5 by 5, or it will be almost equal to 1. So I can say RF value will be less than or equal to 1. Clear? Now the next case is after doing this separation, you will get a developed chromatogram. You will get, okay, this if it is invisible to our naked eye, we will make it pass through UV light. So UV light can be, we can say, the spots of the colorless compounds which are invisible to the eye, but fluorescence in UV light can be detected by putting the plate under UV light. So if it is invisible to our naked eye, put it under UV light. Okay. Another technique is to place the plate in a covered jar. Take this chromatogram and place it in a jar containing crystals of iodine. Then what will happen? The spots of the compound which adsorb iodine, we can say some layer can absorb iodine, and they will absorb the iodine and it will glow up. Thereby we can see that it is getting separated and forming distinct layers. So usually this technique is used to separate amino acids. In exam they ask this question. Amino acids can be detected by, if you are going to separate different amino acids, if you want to see that as a distinct layer, we usually spray the plate with a separate solution that is called ninhydrin solution. Please remember. So if you want to separate different amino acids, and after separating it, if you want to see that as a distinct layer, you need to spray the plate with what? Ninhydrin solution. So this is what all about adsorption chromatography, that is divided into column chromatography and thin layer chromatography. Thin layer chromatography has retardation factor, RF value. RF is the distance moved by the substance from the baseline divided by the distance moved by the solvent. Solvent is nothing but our eluent from the baseline. Okay. Next we will discuss what is called partition chromatography. Okay. So as we learned first initially, the chromatography was divided into two: adsorption chromatography and the next one was partition chromatography. In adsorption chromatography, we have seen the column chromatography and thin layer chromatography. So coming to the partition chromatography, we can say the difference here is we are not here using an adsorbent. So if you look at this diagram, you can see here you are using a chromatography paper is being used here. Okay, that is the solid phase here. Okay, and solvent, that is the eluent. Okay, but here this chromatography paper does not have any adsorbent or anything. Okay, so what this chromatography paper is a special substance that is made up of we can say that contains water trapped in it. So what it will do is you have different setup is there. So either the chromatography paper can be made like this, like a round, you can place it in the solvent. The other technique is you can make it hang from the cardboard using a wire like this. So here what will happen is here the eluent again it will be made to move through this this I can say this chromatography paper through a capillary action. Okay, so when it moves through this paper, what will happen here is the organic substance to be separated, that is also applied here as a spot. It is almost the same as the other one, TLC. Okay, then what will happen to this spot, that will also move up, but that will be getting trapped in this chromatography paper to a different extent. So based on that we can separate the organic compound. That is the technique used here. So I can say partition chromatography is based on continuous differential partitioning of the components of a mixture between the stationary phase and mobile phase. Paper chromatography is considered as a type of partition chromatography. In paper chromatography, what we say a special quality paper. That paper has this quality of what we can say absorbing the substances, actually known as chromatography paper is being used. So this, what is the specialty of the paper? It contains the water trapped in it which act as the stationary phase. Okay, so a strip of this chromatography paper is spotted at the base with the solution of the mixture is suspended in a suitable solvent or a mixture of solvent. Any technique can be used. These are two different types of implementation. Okay, now what will happen, the solvent will act as the mobile phase and solvent is also called eluent. Okay, and the solvent, what it will do, it will rises up the paper through what action? Here the action is capillary action, but in the other one it was adsorption. So please remember both are different. Through capillary action and flows over the spot. The paper, what it will do, it selectively retains. For example, if the mixture is passing through it, I can say the paper will retain, for example, organic compound 1. The organic compound 2 will not have any reaction with paper and it will not be retained. Like that, the paper will selectively retain different components according to their differing partition in two phases. Okay, so the paper strip so developed, we know in both we call it as chromatogram. So here the spots of the separate colored compounds are visible at what, actually at different heights from the position of the initial spot on the chromatogram, similar to the other one. So each will be forming at different layers at different heights from the initial spot. Okay, the spots of the separated colorless compounds may be observed. Now we know that it is adsorbed, but it may not be visible with our naked eye. So what we need to do, this chromatogram should be placed under UV light. So when it is placed under UV light and by using a appropriate spraying reagent, either placed under UV light or spray some special reagent, then you can see all these are forming distinct layers in the chromatogram. This is how they will be getting separated. So with this, almost all the purification techniques are complete. If you have any doubt, feel free to ask. Thank you. Okay, so until now we have seen here the purification of organic compounds. We discussed all the purification technique. Now we will be discussing the qualitative analysis of organic compound. Okay, so qualitative analysis means actually the detection of various elements present in organic compound. Quantitative analysis means how much quantity of that particular element is present in an organic compound. Okay, so please understand the difference between these two. That is very important. Okay, so what we are going to discuss here is the qualitative analysis. Okay, that means whether in a particular organic compound that particular element is present or not. How to detect that? That is what we are going to see next. Okay, so let's start with detection of carbon and hydrogen. So we need to know in the given organic compound whether carbon and hydrogen is present or not. So for that, what we need to do here is take the organic compound, okay, and treat it with copper 2 oxide. Please remember copper 2 oxide. So what will happen when organic compound is treated with copper 2 oxide? You can see the first reaction, the carbon present in the compound will oxidized by the copper 2 oxide to form carbon dioxide. So whatever carbon is present in the organic compound, that is completely converted to carbon dioxide. And similarly, the hydrogen, if present in an organic compound, we know usually an organic compound is made up of carbon, hydrogen, it can be nitrogen, it can be phosphorus, it can be sulfur, it can be oxygen. These are the various elements present in an organic compound. So if hydrogen is present in the organic compound, when it is treated with copper 2 oxide, this will be completely oxidized to water. Okay, now we need to detect the carbon dioxide and water, whether it is present there or not, because many of the students will think like, sir, water is formed, right? So we can see it with our naked eyes. Please don't think like that, because it will be very small amount that will be formed. So what we need to do here is how to detect carbon dioxide. Treat the carbon dioxide with lime water. Okay, treat the carbon dioxide with lime water. Then what will happen? You can see the lime water turning milky, or we say it develops some turbidity. So when you shake it, it becomes turbid. If it is turning turbid, that means carbon dioxide is formed. If carbon dioxide is formed, then we can clearly indicate that that particular hydrocarbon has carbon present. Okay. Similarly, to check whether water is formed, what you need to do here is treat the compound. Okay, if water is there, treat the compound with anhydrous copper sulfate. Anhydrous is very important because it will absorb water. If even a small instant of water is there, it will absorb that water. So what will happen to the copper sulfate? It becomes CuSO4 5H2O, which is blue in color. So the presence of blue color indicates that water was present in it. If why water was present? Because in the base organic compound, hydrogen was present. Okay, so the two things to be remembered here, if carbon and hydrogen needs to be detected, what you should do? Carbon will get converted to carbon dioxide, okay, on treatment with copper 2 oxide. Hydrogen will be converted to water on treatment with copper 2 oxide, and carbon dioxide can be confirmed by the presence of lime water, and H2O can be confirmed by the presence of anhydrous copper sulfate solution. How you identify it? Because anhydrous copper sulfate solution becomes blue in color and the lime water will turn turbid. These are the two ways to detect it. Okay, I hope it is clear for you. Okay, so as I told, the major elements in an organic compound are carbon, hydrogen, then comes nitrogen, okay, phosphorus, sulfur, and halogens. These are the various organic compounds. Even sometimes we also say oxygen as well, but mainly nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and halogens. So these two we have seen how to detect its presence. Now next we are going to see how to detect the presence of nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and halogens. Okay. So for detecting nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and halogens, we have a common technique. So the first step in doing that is preparation of sodium fusion extract. What is it? Sodium fusion extract. So let me tell how to prepare that. Okay, so we can say nitrogen, sulfur, halogens, and phosphorus present in an organic compound is detected by a technique that is called Lenzini's test. Okay, so in what is Lenzini's test? We know that what it will do is the element present in this compound, okay, they are converted from covalent form to ionic form by fusing with sodium metal. So that is basically happening because they are in covalent form. Maybe in carbon, hydrogen, we have some nitrogen related compound in an organic compound. I can say if you look at the bonding nature of this organic compound, mainly it will be covalent nature. Okay, so what it will do is whenever take this organic compound and if you are preparing or if you are treating with sodium metal, okay, what it will happen is this metal or this bonding will get converted to ionic form. Okay, we will see that. For example, when carbon and nitrogen is present, you know that carbon will be present in every organic compound. So in addition to that, if I want to detect nitrogen, I know that when I am fusing with sodium metal, what it will form? Na plus Cn. It forms NaCN, and we know that NaCN will split like Na plus and Cn minus. So I can say it is converted into ionic form. Here this NaCN is called sodium fusion extract. Okay, and similarly I can say Next time I am taking a compound that is containing sulfur. In that case, sodium react with the sulfur to form sodium sulfate. Here sodium sulfate is also called what? Sodium fusion extract. Please remember, it is called fusion extract along with the sodium. So here also sodium is there. Remaining thing is called fusion extract. Similarly, sodium when reacts with the halogen, what it will form? Again, it forms a sodium fusion extract. But each time the sodium fusion extract contains different elements. For example, if you are detecting halogen, which compound is called sodium fusion extract? I can say sodium NaX is called sodium fusion extract. If you are detecting sulfur, then I can say sodium fusion extract is Na2S. This is the sodium fusion extract. And if you are detecting nitrogen, then I can say sodium cyanide is the sodium fusion extract. So similarly, the sodium fusion extract may vary, but the concept is every time that particular element is made to react with sodium to convert the compound from element to ionic form. Is this clear for everyone? And this test is called Lazzaini's test. So here the technique is not completed. We have not detected the element. The first step is the preparation of sodium fusion extract. Okay. Now let's see one by one. Now we know that cyanide, sulfide and halide of the sodium so formed on treatment with sodium. Okay, we will treat it with sodium and also we will boil it with distilled water. Okay. Okay, how we are making why we are boiling it with the distilled water? This is to extract a fused mass, and that fused mass is clearly called sodium fusion extract. Okay, please understand, this is also sodium fusion extract, but we will not say that term exactly sodium fusion extract. When we will say that whenever this compound is further treated with boiling water, this will come as a fused mass, and that fused mass is called sodium fusion extract. Now detection of nitrogen. For detecting nitrogen, what we will do is we will take this sodium fusion extract. This is the sodium fusion extract. So in ionic form it is written. So it has both Na plus and Cn minus. So here Cn minus is only represented. So this sodium fusion extract is boiled with iron 2 sulfate. Please remember these compounds. This they will ask in exam. Iron 2 sulfate. Iron 2 sulfate. Whenever it is treated with iron 2 sulfate, it forms something called sodium hexacyanoferrate. Sodium hexacyanoferrate 2. Please remember, we are taking the sodium fusion extract. Sodium fusion extract is treated with iron 2 sulfate and that result in sodium hexacyanoferrate, and this is called sodium hexacyanoferrate. Sodium is not shown here, but hexacyanoferrate. Now what we will do is we will treat this sodium hexacyanoferrate further with the iron 3 ions. Okay, iron 3 ions. From where iron 3 ions are produced? Because iron 2 sulfate is further oxidized by sulfuric acid. Okay, so that iron 2 will get converted to iron 3. Please remember that. So iron 3 ions on treatment with, it is further treated with the sodium hexacyanoferrate. So what will happen? The sodium will get replaced by iron 3 ions. So it will finally form something called, we can say iron 3 hexacyanoferrate. Okay, iron 3 hexacyanoferrate. Iron 3 hexacyanoferrate, and this is Prussian blue in color. This is Prussian blue in color. If this Prussian blue coloration is formed, then I can say in the below compound nitrogen is present. Okay, so please remember the sequence. So first we will create sodium fusion extract. Then that sodium fusion extract, how we are preparing sodium fusion extract? It is treating with carbon and nitrogen forming NaCN, that is the sodium fusion extract. It is treated with iron 2 sulfate. Then first you will get sodium hexacyanoferrate, and this is further treated with iron 3. How iron 3 ions are produced? This is produced by treating iron 2 sulfate with further sulfuric acid, that will produce iron 3 ions. So this iron 3 ions on treatment with sodium hexacyanoferrate, it will form what? It will form ferric, we can say iron 3 hexacyanoferrate, that is Prussian blue in color. Okay, sometimes it is also called ferrocyanide. Please remember this term also. Iron 3 hexacyanoferrite is also known as ferrocyanide. Very, very important. These two reactions are same. Below this one as well as this one, it's both are same. Okay. So in exam, most of the students will make a mistake, like in exam they will ask the Prussian blue color formation during the detection of nitrogen is formed due to. They will give the option A as sodium hexacyanoferrite. That is wrong. The answer is iron 3 hexacyanoferrite. Okay. Now the detection of sulfur. So detection of sulfur, again, what is the first step? You are treating the sodium with the sulfur, then you will get Na2S. And we know that here Na2S is the sodium fusion extract. Correct? This Na2S is further treated with boiling water to get a fused mass, and that is called sodium fusion extract. Now what we will do, this sodium fusion extract is acidified with acetic acid. It will be acidified with acetic acid and also lead acetate. Okay, lead acetate will be added to it. What will be added? Lead acetate will be added to it. Now what will happen is this lead acetate will split up as Pb2 plus and acetate ions, CH3COO minus, and also the sodium fusion extract will split it up as 2Na plus and S2 minus ion. And what will happen is this lead 2 plus ion combines with the S2 minus ion, because these two are highly ionic in nature, CH3COO minus and Na plus, and they will form sodium acetate, and this will form lead sulfide, and lead sulfide is black in color. So it means that if black color is formed, then it can easily say sulfur is present in that organic compound. So the technique is very simple. Take the sodium fusion extract, acidify with acetic acid and add lead acetate solution. Then what will happen? If there is black color formation or is there, then you can confirm the presence of sulfur. It is due to the formation of lead sulfide. In exam they will ask the black color formation during the detection of sulfur is due to the formation of lead sulfide. Clear? Now next, another technique for detection of sulfur. For sulfur there are two techniques. So the second technique is take the sodium fusion extract. So what is the sodium fusion extract? Na2S, and treat it with sodium nitroprusside. So sodium nitroprusside is, we can say, FeCN5, okay, NO2 minus. Please understand, sodium is also there. Actually they should shade like 2Na plus is also there. This is sodium nitroprusside. Okay, on treatment with this one, what will happen here is this sulfide ion, which is having a valency 2, that will come over here, and you will get something called FeCN5NOS. Okay, FeCN5NOS 4 minus, and this is violet color. Okay, we can say, so basically in exam, what is the question to be asked is, on treatment of sodium fusion extract with the sodium nitroprusside, you will get a violet color. This violet color is due to the formation of, then they will give FeCN5NOS, sometimes they will give NaCN5NOS. Most of the students, please remember, it is FeCN5NOS that is giving the violet coloration. That indicates the presence of sulfur. Now textbook also mentions about another thing, that is, if both nitrogen and sulfur is present, then what will happen? How the sodium fusion extract looks like? I can say sodium fusion extract, then there will be sodium, okay, there will be carbon, then nitrogen and sulfur, then you are getting something like NaSCN, sodium thiocyanate. Okay, so here sodium thiocyanate is called my sodium fusion extract, and I can say if this, so it gives what will happen to this thiocyanate? Okay, it gives blood red color since there is no free cyanide ions are present. So this will give, so this sodium thiocyanate is further treated with the iron 3 plus ions, so that will give FeSCN 2 plus. So that is blood red in color. So that indicates sulfur and nitrogen is present in the compound. So please remember that also. They can ask in exam. So I hope the technique is clear for you. Okay. So please remember, first thing is, for the detection of nitrogen, Prussian blue color. Prussian blue color is due to the formation of ferrocyanide, And for the detection of sulfur, two techniques are there. One method is treating with acetic acid and lead acetate, and lead sulfide formation indicates the presence of black lead sulfide indicates the presence of sulfur. In another technique, we will treat it with a sodium nitroprusside solution. The formation of FeCN5NOS, which is violet in color, that indicates the presence of sulfur. Suppose if nitrogen and sulfur both are present, then you will get sodium thiocyanate, and this will gives blood red coloration. This will gives blood red coloration on treatment with iron 3 ions. Okay. Now last technique, it's a detection of halogens. So here also first method is preparing the sodium fusion extract, but here sodium fusion extract is prepared by treating the sodium with a halogen forming NaX. Okay, so here NaX can be NaCl, or it can be NaBr, or even it can be NaI, sodium iodide, like that. So this sodium fusion extract here, first technique is treating with the nitric acid, and then further treated with the silver nitrate solution. So this is first treated with HNO3, okay, then followed by AgNO3, silver nitrate solution. Now please remember, there are three observations will come. First thing is there can be a white precipitate, white PPT. Okay, this will be soluble in ammonium hydroxide, NH4OH. If it is soluble in ammonium hydroxide and if it is a white precipitate, then I can say this is nothing but my chlorine. Okay. The second observation is very simple. So you will get a yellowish precipitate, yellow precipitate. Okay, yellow PPT, and this will be sparingly soluble in where? Please remember, this will be sparingly soluble in ammonium hydroxide. If it is sparingly soluble in ammonium hydroxide, then I am sure this is nothing but my bromine. Okay. Now the third observation is you will get a yellow precipitate, again a yellow PPT, but here this is insoluble. Okay, this is insoluble in ammonium hydroxide, NH4OH. If it is insoluble, then I know that this is nothing but my iodine. Clear? The three observations should be very clear for you. The first step, if you are getting the extract, can be any of these, NaCl, NaBr, or NaI. If sodium chloride is there, then HNO3 and AgNO3, you are getting white PPT. Okay, soluble in ammonium hydroxide, chlorine. Yellow PPT, sparingly soluble, then bromine. Yellow PPT, but insoluble in ammonium hydroxide, then it is iodine. Is this clear for everyone? Very, very important. Please remember the observation that usually comes as an exam question. Okay. Now comes the last one, that is the detection of phosphorus. This is what usually they will ask for exam. So very, very important, the detection of phosphorus. So what they will do is, here also the phosphorus first step. Here please remember, now we learned about sodium fusion extract was used as the method for the detection of which and all elements? Nitrogen. Okay, then halogens we have seen now, then sulfur. But here the technique is very different. So here what we do is the organic compound which containing phosphorus, the organic compound containing phosphorus, we will treat with a peroxide, usually sodium peroxide, NO2O2. So when it is treated with peroxide, what will happen is, we know peroxide is an oxidizing agent, correct? So what will happen to the phosphorus that is present there? Phosphorus will get oxidized. Okay, so what it will do, this you will get oxidized phosphorus in the resulting compound. Now this solution is further boiled with nitric acid, HNO3. Okay, and then treated with this reagent, you should remember, ammonium molybdate. Whenever in exam they are speaking about ammonium molybdate, then it will be usually the detection of phosphorus. Okay, so what will happen when treated with ammonium molybdate? The phosphorus present in this react to form ammonium phosphomolybdate. Okay, the phosphorus present in the organic compound react to form ammonium. It will form ammonium phosphomolybdate. Okay, this indicates the presence of, and what is the color of ammonium phosphomolybdate? Please remember, that is also yellow. Okay, so I can say the compound is treated with an oxidizing agent, normally sodium peroxide, then phosphorus present in the compound will get oxidized. That resulting solution is further boiled with nitric acid and then treated with ammonium molybdate solution. Then the yellow coloration or yellow precipitate indicates the presence of phosphorus. So you can see the reaction. So sodium phosphate, you can see initially organic compound on treating with Na2O2, this will form sodium phosphate, Na3PO4. This Na3PO4 is further treated with the HNO3, so you will get H3PO4. Okay, then this H3PO4 is further treated with ammonium molybdate, NH42MOO4, with the nitric acid for acidification. It will form ammonium phosphomolybdate. Please remember the formula, they can ask in exam. The ammonium phosphomolybdate or the yellow color during the detection of phosphorus is due to the formation of what? Then they will give some formulas. So please remember NH4 thrice PO4, NH4 thrice PO4, 12 MO molybdenum oxide MoO3. Okay, that is giving the yellow coloration to the compound. So I hope the detection of all the elements are clear for you. So the next we will go to the quantitative analysis. That means if you have carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur or phosphorus is present, how much amount is present in the given organic compound? That is called quantitative analysis. Okay.